1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, warriors. Welcome to 1 in 3. I'm your host, Ingrid. As many of you know, 1 in 3 includes not just women, but also men and children. Today's guest is bravely stepping forward to share his story, a story involving abuse by 3 separate individuals. But this isn't just a story of trauma, it's a story of resilience and of healing nearly 40 years later. And that is a beautiful thing. Here is George. Hey, George, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
I'm very happy for you to be here. And just a quick catch up to those who may not know, George and I met because I had guested on a podcast that he's a co-host for. And as we were talking about things, he agreed to come on 1 in 3 to share his story.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so before I actually start, my original plan as I dealt with what had happened to me, I had originally planned that my story was going to die with me and I wasn't going to tell anyone. And then I ended up telling some of my family, my wife and kids and whatnot. And then I joined this little chat group and got really close with them. I knew them all before, but we hadn't really kept in touch for a while. And I kind of told them, and then I ended up telling on our podcast. So I thought it was a good idea to maybe expand and have others that maybe listen to other shows hear the story. So my story starts, my grandparents had 6 children. And my grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, and my grandfather worked a lot of hours to pay for these, to pay the bills and everything. And the third oldest daughter, when she was 15, got pregnant, and right after she was 16, I was born, the first grandchild to my grandparents. And he had originally planned, as the kids were getting a little older and going to be moving out, drop down, but he continued to do 2 of the 3 jobs that he did, the one full-time and then as one part-time at the hospital, to help support, because they had agreed she was going to stay and go to school. She was single at the time, and I was born with my grandparent, with her maiden name. By the time I was a year old, she had gotten married, and they went through the court process and I was adopted. I still lived in my grandparents' house, and my mom and her new husband sometimes were there. Sometimes they had an apartment till I was about 5. And I don't remember anything happening prior to that. But after we had moved, after I was done with kindergarten and I just turned 6 years old, we moved to a different place. And I remember every time, like, he got drunk a lot. Like that was the first thing he thought of when he got home from work. There'd be my foster father. And I remember he would spank me. And I don't mean like a couple times. I mean, like, every time he did, I couldn't sit for a little while. Bad. And I remember it was I don't remember a lot of details, but I remember that it was for stuff that 6 and 7-year-old kids do. Nothing really bad, where like one quick spanking could have completely taken care of it, or even maybe just, a talking to. After I turned 7, we moved into a bigger house, but we were waiting on the guy that we were buying. We were going to buy this bigger house that actually had a house and a trailer on the property. in town. It wasn't ready yet. He needed to do some things to it. So we moved into another house that he had that was big enough for everyone. At that time, all the kids had moved out except for my mother and my foster father. So it was really just 5 of us living at the house. One time I do remember that he hit me for was, I remember we were out in the country at this house. Out in back, there was like a gully, and at the bottom of the gully, there was a creek. And he showed me the things. He would have minnow traps set up in the creek to catch minnows to use for live bait for fishing. And one night he came home, and when him and my mom came home, I'm assuming from the bar, I don't know, she would always ask me, what'd you do today? How was your day? And I said, well, school was okay. And I came home and I played in the backyard for a while. I went down to the creek and, played by the water. The next day I came home and he was there, and he took me to my room, and he was screaming at me and kept asking me why I opened the minnow traps, why I let all the minnow out. And I was like, I kept telling him that I had not done it. And I proceeded that day to get a pretty severe beating. And then later, I remember laying in bed, not sleeping, and hearing him and my mother talk. And he said, I was thinking about it, and I think I left the minnow trap open yesterday when I emptied them. I never got an apology. I never heard anything more about it. That's what I remember. About 6 months after living in that house, we moved to our larger house. Now, the good thing about that house was the front house was big, and my mother and foster father lived there. I lived out back of the house in a trailer. It was a rather large trailer, but it was just the 3 of us. So within probably a year, apparently his anger was not taken out on me because I didn't live there, was taken out on my mother. So she kicked him out, and he was gone. So I'm like, okay, the abuse is gone. And I want to make it clear that I don't attach the fact that he was an alcoholic to the abuse, because my grandfather at that time, he drank, and and my uncle, he drank, and I never saw them angry while they were drinking ever. I've seen them angry, but usually it's just something that happened in life or whatever, but nothing, they never took it out on anyone else. And then probably around between the time I was 8 and 9 is when my foster father was gone. That summer, right after I turned 9 years old, because my birthday is in June, so I like literally, like, my birthday is right before the end of the school year. I decided, you know what, he's gone. I'm going to spend more time during the summer at Mom's house. Now, at the house, the upstairs was made into like 2 different apartments. There was 2 apartments upstairs. That's kind of a key for a little bit later. So I was staying there, and this was right after probably I think it was the first weekend after school had let out. My mom didn't have a bedroom set up for me yet. She was in the process of doing it, but she said, I have a pull-out couch. And she said, we can set that up at least for the first weekend, and, for the first weekend or so, and then we can go and get everything we need. Because I still wanted to keep my room at my grandparents'. And I remember she said, I'm not going to be I'm going out tonight with some friends. And but we lived right in town, so she was just going uptown. She said, just lock the door when after dark, after you come in the house and everything, and just lock the door, and I'll have my key. I remember early in the morning, like 2 or 3 in the morning, I was awakened by stumbling and a couple people laughing. And she fumbled with the keys and got into the house. And they came in to the living room where I was sleeping. Well, I wasn't sleeping anymore, but where I was in bed. And they turned on the light. And she was with this guy, this man, and I didn't know who he was. They came and sat on the bed and laughing and joking, and you could definitely tell they had both been drinking a lot, but they were talking with me and everything. And probably after about 2 hours, my mother said, "Okay, I think I should introduce you properly to this guy that's here with me." She goes, "That guy that you knew as your father is not your father. This is your father. This is your natural born father." I'm like, "Okay." Nothing much happened. I mean, he stayed for a day or two, and then he was gone. And mom and him explained that he had to work. He had to go to where he worked because he didn't live in that town. He lived about 20 minutes away or so. And I was like, "Okay." Um, I remember after about 2 weeks after, my foster father came and knocked on the door. I was in the front of the house and my mom was in her room. And I looked out the window and I went back and I naturally told, because it was still setting into me, it was still setting into my mind that he's not my father. This other guy's my father. So I went back and naturally I said, "Hey, Mom, Dad's here." She goes, "Well, you can let him in." I'm like, "Okay." My whole walk from her bedroom to the front door, I'm thinking, I thought they weren't getting along and I thought she kicked him out. Why am I letting him in? And they had a heated discussion. I don't know, remember what it was about. Nothing physical, nothing happened. And he was there about 20, 25 minutes and then he left. Well, the following weekend, my father shows up. And at some point, my mother told him the story of what had happened. And that was my first experience with verbal abuse from my father. He just degraded me and said, "How can you get us confused?" And I'm 9 years old, so I have I'm like, I don't know. For 9 years, he was my father. You've been my father for a week or two. So that was my explanation. Then that calmed down. I do remember some good times with both fathers, but at this point, it took a while. Now my friends start coming around. It's summertime, and Eric, who was on the show, that's where I met him, was when I lived in that town. Um, they would come over and everything, and he would be there sometimes, and I say he was there sometimes. I feel almost like now, looking back, it's almost like we had visitation rights with him. Like you have stepchildren and they come over every couple weekends and then they're not there for 2 weeks, and then they come over for the weekend, and that's what it seemed like. We wouldn't see him for a week or so, and then we'd see him for 3 or 4 days, and then we wouldn't see him again, and then he'd come back and we'd see him for 3 or 4 days. So after my friends had hung out with us and come over and whatnot, when they weren't around, he would always belittle them and say that because he knew their parents, they were bad kids. They were just, out to make trouble. And I constantly got berated about who my friends were and the things that we did. Now, he never physically touched me. A lot of verbal abuse. One thing that I should note about my father is that he had a lot of girlfriends, and I have a lot of half brothers and sisters. So during the early times, I don't know how long it was after my father started coming around, my mother and him announced that she was pregnant. And so about 9 months after my, actually 9 months to the day after my birthday, which is telling me that they were hanging out before I met him, my only true sibling, both with the same parents, was born. And not, and sometime after that, not long after that, he was gone. My real father was gone. Never really an explanation or anything. He was just gone. At some point during that time when my father was still around, a couple had moved in to one of the apartments upstairs. They had 3 kids. I got to know the kids a little, and one was their oldest was about a year and a half younger than me. Well, then suddenly the father of these 3 children was hanging out with us a lot, not with his kids, not with his wife, none of them were with him, but he was hanging out at our place. He was hanging out with us. He even took us a couple times to the dirt track racing. And I was like, okay, say, and so I was like, okay, I'm about 10 years old, so I still don't know what's going on. I'm not old enough to understand what's happening here. Then one day, came home from school, and all of his stuff was in the house. I'm like, all right. And she said, the only explanation I got for that was him and his wife got into a fight. They're separating. He needed a place to stay. And we have our area of the house is the whole downstairs. We have plenty of room. I'm like, okay, then why? And I'm thinking, why is some of his stuff in your bedroom? So I'm like, okay, not sure how much longer later, but they were definitely a couple talking. And my mother got pregnant again. And by the time I'm 11, my sister is born. And they're definitely a couple at this point. And my mother worked night shift at a nursing home as I don't know, a CNA. I'm not sure if that's what they're called or not. But she was also going to nursing school. So I would see her probably at least Monday through Friday. I would probably see her for a couple hours a day at best. At some point during that time, my stepfather, I don't know if they were even, I'm not sure if they were married yet because they were both had to have their divorces finalized before they actually got married. So I don't remember if it started before or after they got married. But once in a while he would spank me, but not quite as bad as my foster father, but worse than what I'd seen like my uncle. Like if my cousin did something, he would like smack him like one time on the butt, and that's it. This was a little bit more severe, but not quite as severe as my foster father. And then at some point, before I was, I believe it was after I was 11, but before I was 12, he started touching me sexually. And it got, I mean, at first it was little things, and later it got way more severe, way more often. And about a little after I was 12, we moved to a farmhouse. Now, I should also tell you that his demeanor kind of pushed some of my mother's family away. And I would see them, but not as often as I would see them before, including my grandparents, who at the time lived right out back. So then we moved to a farmhouse, but my grandparents didn't go with us. So it was just me, my mom, and my 2 brothers and sisters, and his 3 kids who are now living with us. but they would go almost every weekend to their parents' house, to their mother's house. But with my mom still going to school, there was still plenty of time for him to touch me and have, do things. By the time I was starting to go through puberty, um, he had a couple medical issues. Like he had a back injury, so he was getting like full disability, but he would work for a few farmers on the side under the table. Um, a lot. And when I got a little older, me and my mom and the other kids were just going up to meet them. And we ended up helping. And they saw that, well, he's a pretty good worker. And so my stepfather decided he was going to make me work. Now, my stepfather could make so much money with the disability. So I think he was like paying half to him on the books and half under the table. But he said, instead of me paying the farmer said, instead of me paying the taxes for the kids to work, I will give you the money and then you give it to them. And that'll just be, they're working for you and all that. Well, first of all, never saw any of that at all. But during that time, as I'm going through puberty, he didn't realize what he was doing. He was kind of setting himself up for failure because as I was working and working hard, and he was basically sitting on the tractor because he couldn't do a lot of the physical stuff, I was getting like built up without me going to a gym or nothing, just doing the hard farm work. And it continued, and the abuse continued both ways. But I started noticing that, like, if he would beat me after I had started doing all this farm work and getting toned and everything, it wasn't hurting as much because I was building muscle. And I kept doing the work and kept, all the abuse continued and I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything because I'm not old enough. And then as I got a little older, I learned there was ways I could get out of the abuse, not necessarily every time, but I was able to avoid it a little, but it still happened. A little while after I had turned 16, now I'm technically old enough to where I could leave, but I waited. As I got a little closer to 16, I knew a guy who knew judo. He taught it. Would stay after school and he would just teach me a few things. And I'm 5'6". Judo is kind of a martial arts that's designed for a smaller person because it's mostly defense and leverage. Now I'm a little older. I just turned 16. It's during that summer after I turned 16. I got home a lot later than I was supposed to. Actually, I think it was actually the school year after I turned 16. Yeah, because I stayed after school for something and I got back much later. He started with that somebody else had to do had to do my chores. And I'm like, yes, but I do their chores every time they're not here. They have another house to go to. I always do their stuff when they're not around because no one else in this house does it. I couldn't, you can't expect the two little ones to do this because they're 5 and 6. So then he started talking about a couple of my friends, and just happens to be when we moved to the farmhouse is actually when I met my current wife. She was one of our neighbors. And he started talking, and at the time we were just friends, and he started talking bad about her. And I was like, don't you talk about my friends like that. And he came at me, and I knew in my mind, I have to let him hit me first. I can't hit first, because if I hit first, then because I'm 16, he can have me arrested or something. So he came at me and I stayed sitting right on the couch and he smacked me on the top of the head. And when he did, I came up with an uppercut to his chin, knocked him down, and we started fighting in the living room. My mother broke it up and I went and he said, if you're going to act like that, you can get out. I said, that's fine by me. I went to my room and I got just enough stuff that I needed. And unbeknownst to any of them, I had put a lock on my door. So when I left, I locked my door so they couldn't get into my room and take my stuff before I came back to get everything else. As I was leaving, he started yelling at me and screaming at me that I was leaving. And I said, well, you told me to leave and now I am. And then he came at me again and again. I did not use judo at all. I wanted a brawl. I wanted this is it. And we swung at each other. I hit him a few times and then when he fell to the ground, I took his head and slammed it into my mother's washing machine, grabbed my stuff, and walked out the door. And that was it. That was when I had decided to make a stand, but I don't know. I could have left months before, but I think I wanted to take out the aggression I had been feeling my entire life. There is one part that I wanted to go back and touch on. Before we moved to the farmhouse, somebody, I don't know who, actually, I do know now. Later on in life, my aunt told me that she had done it. She had seen something and she had called CPS and they had come in and they were allowed to talk to me alone. And I said to her, I asked her because I was concerned because I'd heard it many times. I'd heard it many times before. I was like, what happens if today you think something's going on? If when you interview me, you think something's going on. What happens today? She said, well, nothing. I would have to, and it's like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She said, I would have to go back, fill out a report, and file it tomorrow. And then an investigation would happen. I was like, so what would happen to me short term? She said, well, you would stay here until the investigation was done. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I'm not telling her anything. I'm going to act like everything is fine. I've been acting like everything's fine for so long. I believe now the laws have changed where now if they believe there's abuse, but I mean, we're talking, this was probably 1982, 81. So yeah, I was like, I don't know what he'll do if he finds out that I said something.
And how old were you when that happened?
Well, I know when we moved out of that house and into the farmhouse, I was 12. So it was sometime before that because we were still living in that house. I remember clear as day. We were sitting in the kitchen of the dining room of that house. So I do remember that. So it was before I was 12. So, and I would have turned 12 in 1983. So it had to have been early 83 or before that.
But still, oh my gosh, you're coming in, you're questioning an 11-year-old and then saying, as we investigate, you're going to stay in the same house as your abuser.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And like I said, I believe the laws have changed now. If they believe there's abuse, they take them right then. Actually, I know that because our youngest son, it was neglect. It wasn't abuse at the time. They didn't know if it was abuse. They just knew it was neglect. I knew they were taken out of the house that day. And it was a Saturday or a Sunday. So yeah. So I know they were removed from the house right away when they lived with their parents.
But your aunt never said anything to you or asked you about anything?
No, she never said anything to me. She later told me that she had called and because I don't know, like I said, I didn't have a lot of alone time with a lot of my mother's family. After he had they had seen how he was. I mean, they could tell he was an angry guy and he would get mad about things. I don't know if any of them knew about the abuse other than my aunt had seen something and she didn't know what it was. I don't know. She didn't tell me exactly what she saw, but she said that she had seen something. And I know for a short time, they lived in one of the apartments. So maybe she just saw something or heard something and wasn't sure what it was and just didn't really get a chance to talk to me. So she just reported it.
Well, and that's a big deal that she did that, because I think
Yeah.
back then a lot of people didn't say anything.
Right. I mean, I knew somebody had said something. I just didn't know who. Because otherwise, why would they have been there? They don't normally do that. I mean, we weren't on any assistance or anything. He was on disability, but that's not the same. That's different. Um, so during that time when he was abusing me, I remember one point I was crying during the event. And he had said something to me, and he said, I want you to know that every time for the rest of your life that you cry, you will think of me. And some point right after that was when I had made the mental decision, I'm going to bury all of those feelings. I'm going to bury my feelings and hide them. So it was easy. If I didn't have any feelings, it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't going to hurt me. I didn't know who I could trust and who, if I told. So I literally at some points thought the world was against me. I'm like, this has happened with 3 different guys. And like I said, I just learned to turn them off. Once I had moved out and was on my own, I was living with a friend's parents had I think years ago, it was like a farmhouse, and they had for the workers, they had a little cabin for the workers to live, to stay in when they were working, and then they could go back home, wherever that may be. We fixed it up as an apartment, and me and their son, my friend, lived in it for a while. And then eventually I moved back in with my grandparents. They had the extra room to help me save money and whatnot. One big thing I noticed in my life was I had a major commitment issue. I didn't trust anybody. If I was dating someone and they even suggested anything long term, my mind immediately said, okay, time to look for an escape clause, some way to get out. And I did that for a long time. Matter of fact, the first real commitment thing I did had nothing to do with a relationship, but was when I decided I'm going to join the military after high school. And I'm like, well, I know that technically they have you for 8 years. You may only have a 2-year, which is what I had. I had a 2-year commitment. I ended up re-enlisting and I did 4 years. But for 4 years after that, they can call you back for something if something happens. That was my only real commitment I made before I went off to the military. I went off to the military, and when I finished my tour, I came back. I came home on leave several times, and then and I kept in touch with some of my friends, and some of them would eventually distance. When I came home in July, and the following June, me and my wife had gotten married. We had decided, we've been with other people, I mean, we've been friends all this time. So we ended up getting married and had our 2 daughters. And then at some point, my daughters were still young. I remember they were still young. I had heard that actually before that happened, my biological father was living in Missouri. And I had heard that he was up. I had no intentions of going to see him or nothing. He was really close friends when he lived in our area with my wife's uncle. They were really close friends. He was staying with him. I had no intention of going to see him. My brother wanted to meet his father. I said, okay, I can take you. I remember my oldest daughter was 9 months old. And then, so I took him and met him, and apparently he was there and he had 6 kids with him from the age, ranging from the youngest was 3 and the oldest had just turned 17. They were my half brothers and sisters. And kind of a sidebar thing, I found out I knew one of the kids I went to school with was my brother, but I didn't realize until I was a little older when I was talking to his mother that he is 3 days older than me. It's weird. He was one of the very first people I met in kindergarten. We were in the same class. He was one of the first kids I ever met in school. And turns out we were brothers 3 days apart.
When did you find that out?
I want to say I was like 25. My wife's cousin had just graduated from high school and we were at a graduation party and she was there. And we just got talking and she said, yeah, my son, and she said his name, just celebrated his 25th birthday. And I was like, I just celebrated my 25th birthday. When was he born? And she said June 12th. And I'm like, I was born on June 15th. Are you sure he celebrated the 25th? And she goes, 1971. And I'm like, yeah, I was 1971 too. So I'm like, okay.
My goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how my father was. So turns out those kids he was with when he come up, he was running from the law for abuse on some of them kids. They left, were dropped off somewhere about 30 or 40 miles away from where we live, and they were hiding somewhere. And a police officer drove by and saw one of the kids out in back of this barn and went out to check it out and found them. They extradited him back to Missouri. He spent like 3 years in jail for the abuse and they were fostered out. And the kids now the youngest 3 weren't, the youngest 4 that he had brought with him were not fostered out because their mother was the one who reported the abuse. She took her kids and she moved back to our area where her parents lived. So she brought those 4 plus the other 2 that she had. The ones that were not hers all got fostered out. And yeah, that was my only times ever meeting my father was when I knew him for about the year that I knew him. And then that one time, we went up there probably 3 times while he was there during that week or so that he was up running from the law. So then I know both of my daughters were born at this point. I had heard that my stepfather was really sick and he was on his deathbed. I went to the hospital and walked into the room and I asked my stepsister and all them if I could have a minute with him. And I closed the door. No, they closed the door when they left. I walked over to him. He looked up. He recognized me. I knew he recognized me. And I whispered in his ear, "You lose." And I walked out. Hardest thing I've ever done was that. But I had to let him know I won. He lost. And then I don't know, I know we had our son. We adopted our son. I guess technically we didn't adopt him. We just became his guardians. And my real father had passed away. I did go to they didn't have a service. They only had like call-in hours or something. I went to them, but I went to them for one reason. I didn't want to see him. Well, actually two reasons. I wanted to know it was real, that he's really gone. And I wanted to meet some of the family I'd never met, because I'd never met hardly any of his family outside of those 6 kids he brought up. And the 2 I went to school with. So I went up and I met them, and I keep in touch with some of them. I haven't heard from my one sister in a while, but she was divorced and she had gotten remarried afterwards. I went to her wedding. And then I think something happened to where the marriage didn't work, and she's done it before. Apparently, she was abused by my father when she was young, and when she turned 16, she ran away. Well, that's what she's done again, and we haven't heard from her in a couple years. So she ran away, but this time she ran away because the guy she married was friends with all of the family. So she ran away again. And after telling my story on our podcast, it helped a little when I told it in the group chat. But then when I told it on the podcast, I started noticing these feelings I hadn't felt come out. I'm getting choked up thinking about them coming out now, and I don't get choked up. My grandfather, who I respect more than anybody that's ever walked the planet for what he's done, what he did for me, what he did for his wife and 6 kids. When he passed, I shed no tears because I wasn't at that point yet. Now I am, and these feelings are starting to come out more, and a couple of my close friends have noticed it. I mean, Becky told me, she said, the hugs are different. There's more feeling in them. And I was like, there was nothing before. Before it was, yes, it's great to see you, old friend, haven't seen you, but it could have been anybody. Now they're starting to come out. So I think telling this story helped bring me back, I guess. Because most of me before was fake. Because was my defense mechanism. And that pretty much brings us up to now.
I'm so proud of you, and I'm so honored that you came on to share that. And I don't cry usually during these, but this is incredible. You're so strong, and I totally get putting on like that armor and just not allowing that. I mean, that makes sense, especially after what was said to you.
Yeah.
But I think it's absolutely incredible how much and how powerful it is to just get that out of your system and talk about it. And not only do you help yourself, you help other people at the same time.
Right. Originally, that was why I told my story. I mean, probably maybe 15 years ago was the first time I had told anyone any part of my story. And that was just my family, my wife, my kids, and them. And that was it. And the reason I did that is because one of the children was sexually abused by his father. We had custody of him for a little while, but he needed more help than we could provide. And at the time, some abusers, they hide their feelings like I did. Some abusers, especially sexual, if they're male, they become womanizers, and some are violent. And he was that. He was violent at times. And even though my youngest daughter was 2 years older than him, once a boy starts going through puberty, they become stronger than most girls when they go through puberty. I mean, that's a natural occurrence. So he was still able at some point he was able to overpower her. I mean, my daughter literally had to pull him pull him off of her one time when I just wasn't in the room, or actually they were outside on the trampoline and I think I was mowing the lawn or weed eating or something. But that's why I told them, because he was the boy was gone now. He was in a home, and I decided, I'm gonna tell, because they naturally think that everybody's gonna be that way, that was abused that way. And I was like, no. I was like, literally, I want to say I've probably spanked my kids, including the boy that was violent at times, probably 4 times ever. And that's all of them combined. I, and it was at the time probably needed, but it wasn't excessive. I mean, it was like one spank, and that was it. So if I learned anything from my 3 fathers, was I'm not going to become them. And like I said, once I first really told my story on the air, is when I started noticing this change, and it's been a long time. I want to say, I know we were in the farmhouse. I want to say I was probably 14 when he said that to me. So I turned 54 in June. And to say that within the last 6 months is when it started happening, was when I told, it might have been even less than that. So for pretty close to 40 years, these feelings were hidden, were gone. And they're starting to come back, and it's a good thing, but me getting used to them is the hardest thing.
I was going to
I
say,
don't,
how does it make
yeah,
you feel? Is
yeah,
it
yeah.
weird?
I don't remember these feelings, so when they come out, I don't know how to deal with them all the time. I think that's my hardest thing, is dealing with these new feelings that they're just new to me. I mean, they're not new to people. They're just, to me, they're brand new. Because I've been without them more than I've been with them. So
Yeah. But that's going to feel so good, though, because I think
yeah,
like the
yeah,
happy feelings are going to feel even
yeah, yeah,
happier. Like it's just going to be more intense.
yeah, absolutely. I've already, like I said, I've already seen it. I've already noticed it, and I see things, differently, and it's like, okay, it just took me a long time to tell. Because I
Yeah.
had told them, I don't remember when I told them in the group chat. It was probably early springs, probably almost a year now, last year. And then it was months. And then I just decided, I'm like, you know what? Because we did a couple shows about about serious things, And then we had this woman, Deb Maxwell, on our show, and she talked about suicide. And at some point during that episode, I actually lost track of what they were talking about, because my mind took over, and I said, she's telling her story about what happened with her son. And I don't want to say it wrong because she says it a certain way. I don't think she says commit suicide. I think, because commit means,
Right. Is it like completed suicide?
yeah, it might be completed. And so when at some point I lost track of things, because I'm like, if she can tell this story, I was like, and it helped people. I mean, she has her own podcasts and things that she does. I was like, maybe my story will. And like I said, the end result I never expected in myself. That just is a bonus, I guess.
That's a good
That's coming
bonus.
out of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I think what it does is it's like all this weight that you've been carrying, you get to just let some of that go, put some of
Yeah.
it down
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not afraid to say this part. I doubt she'll watch anyway, but I tried. Yes, in a way. Did I blame my mother in ways? Absolutely. Um because she wasn't ever single very long. And it to me it was like she just the first guy that comes along that looks her way. Um and she didn't see any of it, or she didn't think that, like, she saw my foster father hit me and she had to have known that was excessive. I mean, it was so excessive that when I was out of the picture and he turned to her, she kicked him out. So why wasn't it severe when it wasn't to her, when it was to someone else? And oh, I tried. I my my sister, my half sister born to my mother, the one when I was 11, she's obviously the favorite. And my mother doesn't, I've lived in the current house I live in. We've been here almost 19 years. My mother has been to it once. I've lived in, well, we've lived in 3 places since we've been married. And this June will be 30 years. And yeah, and she hasn't been, like I said, she's been to this house once. And my mother in law ran into her, oh, probably 5 years ago, maybe a little more. And they were talking. And my mother asked her how we were doing, how was everything. And she told her, well, they're doing fine and this and that. And my mother said to my mother-in-law, I would love to see him more often, but I don't want to make my daughter mad.
What?
Yeah. Oh, I'd received a handwritten letter in the mail from my mother, and I read it, and I just kind of, okay. And I put it, at the time, we had, like a reclining love seat, but it wasn't side by side. In the middle, there was like a center console where you could I tossed it in the center console. Well, we were getting rid of that, and I was cleaning it out, and I came across this letter, and I was like, okay. I was like, all right. So I texted her. And I said, I think you need to know something. I said, I can't do it now, but I was like, and we set a day, and I was like, I don't think I can talk to you on the phone. I think it should be in text. And she said, okay. I was like, but I need to make sure you're free and have nothing else going on. I told her I told her the story and my point of view. And kind of the reaction I got was, oh, I didn't know any of that. That's it. Not sorry for, not anything. So yeah, me and my mom we were close at one point, and I tried to stay close. But I guess when I got married and started my own life and didn't need the help, I guess that was how it was.
I think sometimes when you get true people in your lives that have true love, and it makes you realize what is not the real stuff, or what's more
Right.
toxic or damaging for you. And
Yeah.
it's good that you're in a place where you can recognize that and just move on from it.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, like, you'd love closure from it,
Yeah.
but it's sometimes you just have to walk away, and that's the healthiest thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's pretty much what I've done. I don't see any of my family very often. The ones I was the closest to, they have both passed, both my grandparents. So I should tell you, I see my grandfather more than I see the rest of my family. And I already told you that he passed away. He is the reason I chose Army over one of the other armed forces. I go to his grave I didn't last year. My daughter had to go to my, my daughter had to go to urgent care last year on Veterans Day. but it used to be a tradition. I would go to his gravesite at Veterans Day. And I didn't do it last year. My daughter had to go to urgent care, so I took her to urgent care, and
Yeah,
I was
you
like,
have to do
okay,
that.
I mean, but I used to do it every year, and I'll probably do it again this year. And it's just something I do. So I see my grandfather more than I see the rest. I see my grandmother too, because they share a grave. They were both cremated and put in the same grave. My grandmother passed first, and she actually was in her urn for about 3 years before they put them in the ground together. So,
Well, you also
but
have a pretty good group of friends. That's
yes,
for me, from my point of view, looks pretty tight, like a family. So that's
yeah. I had known like everyone in the group chat that I was added to a little over a year ago. I knew most of them. Literally think there was one I didn't know, but she's a friend of one of the people in the group chat. But I've gotten to know her a little bit. Not a lot. I haven't spoken to her in a while, but 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 yeah, a lot of these I don't want to say they were all friends. Definitely Jeff was for a while in school. Not a close friend, but just a friend. I mean, I would have considered him a friend. Eric and me, when I was a little younger, um, we were friends. And me and Becky, we became friends in late in my high school career. I'm a couple years older than her. She was part of my group that I hung out with after school. Then we kind of, I don't want to say drifted apart, but we didn't see each other for a while. I went off to the army. She had to finish school. And when I came home and me and my wife got together, she came back into my life and would hang out at our apartment almost every night. And then she got married, and we kind of drifted a little bit again. And then about little over a year ago, we got back, and I don't know. I don't know what I would do without them at this point. Any of them. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what I would do without them now.
they're a good group.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and
Well,
they helped me, obviously. I mean, that's why my story came out and why I'm healing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to be around the right people to be able to talk
Yeah.
about something that's so vulnerable.
Right. Right.
But George, I'm so happy for you, and I'm so grateful and honored that you came and
I'm,
decided to share
I'm,
your story with me too.
thank you. And I'm glad that you were you were going to invite me. I mean, Eric kind of
Yeah,
jumped the gun for you a
he
little,
did. He
but
took the glory.
but I'm glad that you invited me and I was able to tell my story again and heal a little more. And
Yeah,
hopefully I can help somebody else heal now
I
again.
think so.
Yeah.
I think for sure this will definitely help. I also wanted to say thank you for your service.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. I always say when somebody says that to me, I always say thank you. And the reason I say thank you is because if my service wasn't needed because of all of you, it wouldn't have meant anything.
I
So
like how
that's
you look at it that way.
yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, I think that's the closest thing to feelings I've had over the last year was that. Um
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
amazing. What amazing progress in just a year.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy for you. Thank you again. Is there anything else you'd like to say before?
No,
Okay.
I think that's about it.
Okay. All right. I want to extend a wholehearted thank you once again to George for sharing his story. And thank you for listening. I will be back next week with another episode. Until then, stay strong. And wherever you are in your journey, always remember you are not alone. Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website onein3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 Podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.